So let's look at who can create money. Let's walk through this step by step. Here we have Best National Bank, and this is the balance sheet. Step one, the bank accept a deposit. So someone called Brad Rich walk into the bank and say, I have $100,000. I want to open an account. So you have $100 like appearing as liability in the bank's balance sheet because this is money that the bank owe Brad Rich. The central bank requires the bank to keep 10% of its checkable deposit in reserve. So they, this Best National Bank, right, put aside $10,000 as required reserve. What can the bank do with the 90,000 excess reserve? Answer is that they can lend the money out. So at this point, the bank just sit there and wait for somebody to walk in the bank and say, I want to borrow money. Connie Jones walk in and she wants to borrow money. The bank lend as much as they can, and they can lend a maximum of 90,000, and Connie Jones borrowed the entire 90,000. So these appear as loans, 90,000. Right? The moment the bank approved the loan, M1 increased by the same amount. Suppose Connie Jones borrowed 90,000 and deposit the loan back into the bank because she hasn't decided how to spend the money yet. Then what we see is that there's another account that appears on the liability side, Connie Jones depositing $90,000. And because the banks have to set aside 10% of this 90,000, the banks have to set aside $9,000, making it a total of 19,000 of required reserves. 10,000 from the Bradrich account and 9,000 for the Connie Jones account. What can the bank do with this new $81,000? Well, the answer is the same. The bank can lend out this $81,000. The question then is, how does this affect GDP? How does this affect consumption? The answer is not yet. Okay? Right? We have to wait. We have to wait for Connie Jones to spend that $90,000 loan that she has taken out. Suppose she spent it at Buy Best. That is exactly when consumption increased by $90,000. And GDP equals to C plus I plus G plus X. So if C goes up by $90,000, GDP goes up by $90,000. What happened to Connie Jones' account in the Best National Bank balance sheet? Well, she spent all the money, right? So the liability now become zero. On the asset side, right, we have the required reserve falling from 19,000 back to 10,000 to reflect the 10% for Bradrich's account. What's the excess reserve now? The answer is zero. So where have the $81,000 excess reserve gone to? So what happened to the $90,000? Well, suppose Buy Best deposit is $90,000 that they received from Connie Jones into Yazoo National Bank, then it would appear into this balance sheet. Yazoo National Bank would show that the Buy Best account has $90,000. They put aside the required reserve 10%, $9,000. and the excess reserve is $81,000. Right? So Yazoo National Bank can lend out this excess reserve. And this can go on and on and on, right? And from $100,000 initially deposited by Brett Rich, right? Moving on to Coney Jones and the Bybest, we can see this cycle of money being created. So much so that towards the end, the initial $100,000 deposit would become $1 million, an increase of 10 times. Right? And this create a new excess reserve of $900,000. So one may say that this is real money because Brett Rich walked in with a check, and this is like money that's created out of thin air. So looking at this, where is the central bank in this money creation? We see how important it is that the banks must be willing to lend. We see how important that you need Coney Jones to borrow the money. Where's the central bank? Right? Well, the central bank can appear in two ways. The first is the central bank decide on the percentage of reserve required ratio. In this example here is 10%, right? 1 divided by 10% is 10 times. That's why $100,000 become $1 million. If the central bank want to promote more lending, then the central bank can cut the reserve requirement from 10% to 5%. 1 divided by 5% equals to 20 times. Right? The other way the central bank can appear is to behave like Brett Rich. The central bank can buy treasury bonds in the market and deposit the money with Bank of America or with uh, Yazoo Bank or the Best National Bank here, and behave like Brett Rich and create the initial seeding of the money supply process. So, where is the real money? For this, let's play a game. Suppose instead of spending the money buying electronics or whatever at Bybest, Coney Jones and three friends, A, B, and C, instead of spending money at Bybest, Coney Jones buys $90,000 of SPY, the ETF for the S&P 500 from A. And A uses the $90,000 trade on margin to buy $180,000 of QQQ from B. That is the NASDAQ 100 exchange traded fund. B uses the $180,000 trade on margin to buy $360,000 of SPY from C. Right? And C uses a $360,000 trade on margin to buy, well, you see the pattern, right? Okay. And you can see how, right, the market can keep going up until the bank stop lending money. What is real? What is not real? Well, does it matter? So long as there's confidence in the market, so long as the bank is willing to lend, so long as the market participants believe the value indicated by the stock market, then it is real. So it all depends on confidence. Let's look at this diagram to summarize what we have discussed in this element. We have monetary base multiplied by the money multiplier equal to the money supply. The monetary base is determined by the Fed or the central bank. And this is equal to the currency in circulation plus reserves. Obviously, nowadays, central bank do not need to print physical money. if they want to increase money supply quickly, they just go through the electronic means, and that's how reserves are created. QE, quantitative easing, is just a matter of adding reserve to the system. So you can think of QE as bread rich. On the money multiplier side, this is determined by the Fed because the Fed can decide on the reserve requirement ratio. It depends on the banking system. The banks must be willing to lend. And it depends on the non-banking public. The public, household, or businesses must be willing to borrow. Right? So the key assumption here is that banks hold no excess reserve, and the non-bank public does not increase its holdings of currency. It's important to just bear in mind that we need Coney Jones to borrow money and to spend. And this is how we get our M1. Right? This concludes this module.